Picture a place where chandelier lights dazzle the eyes but can't hide the truths tucked away in people's hearts. It was at a horse auction, amid cruel laughter and scornful stares, that Silas Beckett stepped in, a dusty outsider with a quiet fire in his chest. They mocked him, jeered at his rough look and patched shirt, thinking they had him all figured out. But what happened next shut them up. A magnificent stallion, a jaw-dropping bid, and a lesson no one saw coming. This is the story of how appearances deceive, and how an animal can reveal who we really are. Let's start from the beginning, because that's where the magic happens. The sun beat down on the gravel lot, but inside the auction barn the air was cool, thick with the scent of pricey cologne and the clink of champagne glasses. Silas Beckett pushed the wooden door open with his shoulder, trailing a cloud of dust that screamed outsider in that polished world. His faded flannel shirt, missing a button, stood out against the crisp suits all around. He ran a calloused hand through his gray hair, feeling the elite's sharp gazes dripping with prejudice. This wasn't a place for a guy like him, their silent judgment said. The chatter paused for a beat, replaced by muffled snickers and whispers. "Check out the hick," someone muttered, while a woman in heels tilted her chin up like the earthy smell on Silas's boots offended her. He didn't flinch. He'd faced worse than sneers. The horse auction here was a game of high society, where money spoke louder than character. But Silas wasn't there to impress anyone. What had dragged him into this snake pit? In the corner, a golden chandelier cast light over the buyers, but Silas stayed in the shadows by the weathered plank wall. The click of expensive shoes on waxed floors screamed the gap between him and these folks. His essence was raw, forged in years of hard work, while everything here revolved around show. A guy in a tie pointed at him and laughed, joking about selling chickens, not buying horses. Silas just gave a half smile. They didn't know a thing. His humility was almost tangible, like the faint whiff of hay still clinging to his clothes. He didn't need to prove anything to this crowd. What he wanted went beyond their judgment. While the others strutted with cigars and gold rings, he kept his hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the arena where the horses would appear. Something was calling him, something no one else seemed to notice. Could a stranger like him really find a place in this circus of vanity? The auctioneer climbed the podium, slamming the gavel with a sharp crack that echoed through the barn. The crowd shifted, eager for the prize stallions about to strut in. Silas stood still, an oddity in that sea of arrogance, but with a certainty burning inside. What they didn't know was that he wasn't just some lost old farmer, and what came next would choke those snickers right out of them. The arena door swung open, and a respectful hush fell as Storm King stepped in. The black stallion gleamed like onyx under the lights, his defined muscles rippling with every firm step. The deep thud of his hooves on the ground was almost hypnotic. The air humming with his power. Silas felt a shiver crawl up his spine, not just from the horse's beauty, but from something deeper, a man-animal connection he couldn't put into words. While the others saw dollar signs, he saw a wild spirit begging to be understood. Storm King tossed his head, ears perked, his dark eyes sweeping the crowd. Buyers whispered about his champion bloodline, the trophies, the profit he'd bring. But Silas didn't hear any of it. He felt the weight of that gaze, like the horse was searching for something, or someone. Storm King's identity wasn't. In the papers, the auctioneer waved around, but in the quiet fire behind those eyes. Was Silas crazy to think the stallion felt him too? The crowd buzzed, itching for the bidding to start, but Silas stayed rooted, almost forgotten on the sidelines. He noticed how Storm King snorted, a rough sound slicing through the chatter, like he scorned all that pomp. This was a horse built to run free, not parade for these self-important types. Silas stepped forward without thinking, and the stallion swung his neck toward him. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. What was going on here? He couldn't explain it, but it was like Storm King recognized him, like they shared a story no one else could grasp. The smell of polished leather and floor wax faded for a moment, replaced by a memory of Silas's, the biting wind of open fields where he'd grown up. This horse was more than a trophy. It was a mirror to his soul. But how could he prove that to a room full of strangers? The auctioneer kicked off the bidding, and the tension rose like a wave. Silas knew Storm King was worth more than gold to these people, but to him it was different. A chance for transformation, for finding something he didn't even know he'd lost. What came next would test more than his wallet. Could he really fight for that bond? The bids flew fast, sharp as arrows, while the auctioneer struggled to keep up. But before Silas could speak, two security guards in black suits closed in, their radios crackling in their hands. "You need to leave, sir," one said, voice flat, and eyes hard, like Silas was a stain on their fancy rug. The crowd parted, some chuckling quietly, others just watching. The prejudice here was so thick you could slice it. He tried to explain, voice steady but firm, saying he was there to buy. "You don't look like a serious bidder," the other guard snapped, eyeing his worn boots and patched shirt. Class mattered more than intent, and Silas felt his pride sting, though he didn't let it show. He knew appearance versus essence was a game these folks played poorly. Would they really kick him out before he could prove who he was? The audience piled on, tossing laughs and cutting remarks. "Go back to your farm, old man," a guy in a suit hollered, while a woman nearby fanned herself like Silas's presence was a heat wave. He stayed silent, fists clenched in his pockets, eyes still on Storm King. The stallion, sensing the tension, let out a loud whinny that made the chandelier quiver. It was almost a warning. What did that horse know that they didn't? One guard grabbed Silas's arm, but he shook it off with a firm tug, keeping his cool. "I'm staying till the auction's done," he said, low enough to sound like a growl. His humility wasn't weakness. It was strength held back, ready to burst. The crowd hesitated, sensing something off script. Did this outsider have more up his sleeve than they thought? The auctioneer banged the gavel to pull focus back to the arena. The bids rolled on, but Silas's gaze didn't waver from Storm King. He knew he wasn't leaving without a fight, not for pride, but for something bigger still to come. And the next bid would flip everything. The numbers climbed fast, each voice trying to top the last. 200,000, 300, 450. The auctioneer could barely keep pace, the gavel hovering. Silas stood quiet, heart thumping steady, feeling the moment's weight. Then, as the latest bid hung in the air, 450,000, he raised his hand, voice cutting through like low thunder. $500,000. Silence dropped like a rock. The whole room turned to him, jaws slack, the sound of glasses freezing mid-sip. Even the auctioneer blinked, dazed, holding the gavel like he'd forgotten its purpose. 500 grand? From a guy who looked like he'd stumbled out of a barn? Their prejudice morphed into doubt, then shock. Silas stood there, calm as if he'd just ordered a beer. Was he bluffing? No one laughed this time. The Thai guy who'd mocked him earlier let his cigar go out, pride wounded plain on his face. The fan lady dropped her accessory in her lap, eyes wide. Silas's overcoming wasn't just cash. It was a slap to those who judged by looks. He didn't need to shout to show who he was. But could he back up that bid? Storm King stomped a hoof in the arena, a sharp sound ringing through the hush. It was like the stallion knew something big had shifted. The man-animal connection between him and Silas pulsed in the air, unseen but strong. The guards, still lurking, swapped unsure glances. Kick him out now? No chance. What came next would seal their fate. The auctioneer cleared his throat, trying to regain control. 500,000 going once, twice. No one dared raise a hand. The gavel fell with a bang, and the game flipped. But the doubt still lingered. Could Silas really pay? The tension in the room was so thick you could taste it, a mix of sweat, pricey perfume, and disbelief. Silas walked to the podium, his boots thumping on the waxed floor, every eye tracking him like vultures. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his shirt pocket, opened it slow, and handed over a cashier's check. "There you go," he said, plain as day. The paper trembled in the auctioneer's hand as he read aloud. $500,000 signed Silas Beckett. Shock turned to respect in a heartbeat. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses, double-checking the signature and bank seal. "Valid," he announced, voice nearly cracking. The crowd gasped, some whispering, others just staring. Silas's identity, the one they thought they'd pegged, crumbled like a house of cards. He wasn't some broke farmer, but a man who held more than he showed. Would anyone there apologize? A bold guy in a shiny blue suit stepped up. "How does a guy like you?" Silas cut him off with a steady look and a half smirk. "Hard work pays off," he said, leaving it at that. His humility didn't need a speech, but the transformation in the room was clear. Laughter turned to murmurs of awe. And Storm King, did he feel it too? The stallion, still in the arena, stood quiet, eyes locked on Silas as the auctioneer handed over the sale papers. The man-animal connection between them was the real prize here, worth more than money or status. Silas tucked the documents in his pocket, the moment sinking into his chest. What came next was more than a win. It was a beginning. The crowd started to thin out, some still stunned, others pretending nothing had changed. But something had, and Silas's next move would show it to everyone. Papers in hand, Silas crossed the room to the arena, his steps mingling with the hum picking up again. Storm King raised his head as he neared, ears twitching like they caught something in the air. The stallion, who'd snorted and stomped at strangers, went still, chest rising and falling slow. Silas reached out, feeling the warm snout brush his rough fingers. It was like the horse was saying, "You, it's you." The crowd watched, some still gaping, others hiding their curiosity. The air felt different now, less perfume, more life, like the breeze before a storm. The man-animal connection between Silas and Storm King was so obvious, even the cynics felt a tug at their hearts. He didn't need to yank the reins or raise his voice. The stallion lowered his head, resting it on Silas's shoulder. Could an animal really choose like that? A handler holding the rope let out a soft, "Whoa." "He's never done that before," he muttered, almost to himself. Silas gave a gravelly chuckle, scratching Storm King's neck with a tenderness no one expected from that rugged man. The respect between them wasn't about cash or power. It was purer, truer. But what did that mean to the onlookers? The elite's eyes still burned into Silas's back, but now with a different edge. Less judgment, more wonder. Even the guards who'd grabbed him earlier stood quiet, like they knew they'd messed with the wrong guy. Storm King stepped closer, hooves clacking like a vow. The next chapter would be written outside these walls. Silas took the rope gently, feeling the stallion's weight beside him. He didn't need to look back to know he'd turned the tables. But where was he taking this king of horses? Preston Holloway, the industry tycoon, stood frozen in the corner, his whiskey glass forgotten in his hand. He was the king here, always taking home the best horse, but now his wounded pride was plain to see. Silas passed by with Storm King, and Preston's eyes tracked every step, jaw tight. The crowd that once fawned over the magnate now buzzed about the stranger who'd humbled him without trying. Power had switched hands. The auction's restart hummed in the background, just white noise to Silas. He smelled the leather and sweat of the stallion beside him, a living reminder that this wasn't about status. It was about essence. Preston stepped forward like he might speak, but stopped. "What do you say to a man who beats you with humility?" Silas didn't glance back. Would the tycoon swallow that lesson? The other buyers, once so full of themselves, toned it down. Some even risked a nod at Silas like they wanted redemption. He didn't need their approval. His quiet victory belonged to him and Storm King. The transformation in the room was subtle but real. Respect had a new owner. And the horse, what did he think of it all? Storm King walked beside Silas, head high, like he knew he'd found his true match. His hooves rang out firm, almost proud, against the powerful's shamed silence. Silas gave him a light pat, a simple move that said it all. The next step was leaving that fake world behind. He pushed the barn door open, warm late afternoon air hitting his face. The game was over in there, but the real story was just starting. Outside, Silas's beat-up old pickup waited, paint peeling and engine coughing like a tired grandpa. He hitched Storm King to a plain trailer, the stallion accepting it with a calm that seemed to say, "I trust you." The engine's rumble cut through the lot stillness as the elite peeked from the barn windows. They'd expected a luxury rig, not this junker. Silas laughed to himself. Appearance versus essence had never been clearer. The dirt road stretched ahead, dust and dry grass smells pouring through the open windows. Storm King swayed in the trailer, eyes half closed, like he could already taste the freedom coming. Silas tapped the wheel, the radio crackling an old country tune. It was a return to roots, to the hard work that made him who he was. Would the stallion like what lay ahead? The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and purple, and Silas felt a peace he couldn't name. His overcoming wasn't just silencing the crowd. It was bringing Storm King to a place where they could both be themselves. No show rings or gold trophies, just earth, sky, and wind. But what would the ranch reveal? The truck rattled over potholes, and Storm King let out soft nickers, like he was chatting with Silas. Their man-animal connection grew with every mile, a bond beyond words. He pulled up by a crooked wooden gate, the journey's end nearing. What came next would be the real magic. Silas stepped out, boots crunching on the ground amid cricket chirps. He opened the trailer, ready to show Storm King his new home, and that's when it would happen. The gate creaked as Silas shoved it open, revealing the ranch, a simple wood house, a lopsided barn, and fields stretching to the horizon. He unhitched Storm King, and the stallion took a tentative step, sniffing the crisp air laced with wet grass. Then, like a switch flipped, he bolted, hooves pounding the earth in a symphony of freedom. Silas watched, chest swelling with a quiet victory. The sky darkened, stars popping out, and Storm King's galloping echoed over the hills. This was his identity, not an auction horse, but a king of the fields, free to be who he was born to. Silas leaned on the gate, the cool breeze brushing his face. He knew what it was to crave belonging. Did the stallion feel it too? Next morning, the sun rose shyly, and Silas found Storm King grazing calmly by the creek. The smell of hot coffee rose from his mug, mingling with the damp morning air. The horse's transformation was clear. His coat gleamed, ears relaxed. He'd found his home, and Silas, his purpose. But what did that say about the man who brought him here? The days rolled on in a simple rhythm. Silas fixing fences, Storm King racing the fields. Their man-animal connection was the heart of that place, proof that true respect doesn't need an audience. He'd laugh sometimes, recalling the auction stares. Who'd have thought a hick and a stallion could change so much? The ranch became a haven where essence trumped appearance. Silas knew he'd won more than a horse, he'd found a piece of himself, and the legacy of it all was still unfolding. Months passed, and Silas and Storm King's tales spread like wildfire among the neighbors. The old farmer who silenced the elite became a legend, not through swagger but humility. Folks dropped by the ranch sometimes, curious to see the stallion who flipped the script. Silas just pointed to the fields where Storm King ran and said, "Don't judge what you don't get." His life lesson was simple but cut deep. The auction laughter still echoed in Silas's mind, but now it was just faint noise. He'd sit on the porch at night, the smell of burning wood rising from the fire pit, while Storm King rested near the barn. Their man-animal connection had transformed them both. One gave freedom, the other a home. Would the elite ever grasp that Preston Holloway never showed at the ranch? But word was he stopped mocking strangers at auctions. His wounded pride turned to silence, maybe even respect. Silas didn't need the tycoon's nod. His win was the peace he felt there, with Storm King by his side. The ranch stood as living proof that essence outshines the rest. Storm King aged with grace, black coat flecked with white, but his eyes still burned bright. Silas cared for him like a brother, each day strengthening the bond born at that auction. Their transformation was a reminder. Real worth isn't in the surface, but in what you build with your heart. And this story still inspires. Silas left a legacy beyond the ranch. An idea that respect comes from being yourself, not what others want you to be. And Storm King was the king who proved it. And so what started with jeers and scorn ended in silence and awe. Silas Beckett and Storm King showed that appearances lie, but essence roars. A rough man and a rejected horse became kings of their own world, proving a man-animal connection can change everything, even the hardest hearts. If this story stirred you, share yours with us. What animal has taught you a lesson you'll never forget?